Namaste. In today's lecture, we will have a look at the historical overview of ecology. Now, any discipline of science goes through several stages in which its theories are formed. Those postulates that are not correct, they get overturned, and we gather all new forms of knowledge and we try to put them into a framework. Now, in this lecture, we will have a look at how ecology has come up through the years. Now, in this particular lecture, we will not only see who did what, but we will also pay a tribute to all the founders of this particular subject. So, we begin with Theophrastus. Now, Theophrastus was a Greek scholar who lived from 371 BC to 287 BC. So, now you can see that our subject of ecology, it's not a new subject, it is as long as 2300 2400 years old. Now, Theophrastus was a student of Aristotle. He is considered the father of botany, and he described interrelationships between animals and their environments. Now, a very basic tenet of ecology is that it tries to understand the distribution and abundance of different organisms. So, in this case, we ask this question that if you have a certain organism in a certain area, why is it found in that area? So, you first try to ask where are different organisms found, and then once you know that a certain organism is found in a particular area, you ask the question why is it found in that area. So, essentially, for instance, if you have this forest and in this forest you have say some hills here, and you have a certain species of plant that is growing in this area on the top of this particular hill. So, firstly you will ask the question where are different species found in this forest. So, with that, once you have documented things, you find that this particular species resides on the top of this mountain. Next, you ask the question why is it living in the top of that mountain, what are the conditions that it gets there that it is able to survive there. Probably this particular plant requires a very cold temperature which is not found in any other place and is only found on the top of that particular mountain. So, we will call such factors as pull factors. So, these are the factors that are pulling this plant to this particular area. And if we look at the other areas, so probably you will ask the question why is this plant not found here. So, probably you have a very high temperature in this area which becomes a push factor. Now, while discerning the pull factors and the push factors, you also understand the requirements of different organisms, you also understand the interactions that any organism has with members of its own species, with members of other species, the kinds of interactions the organisms have with the environment, what are the levels of fluctuations in the environment that any organism is able to tolerate or not tolerate. So, all of these things, when you study them together to understand the abundance and distribution of different organisms, you are studying ecology. Now, Theophrastus was one of the very first people who described the interrelationships between animals and their environment. So, which is why we say that he was one of the very earliest ecologists. Now, in those days we did not have a number of theories, we did not have scientific equipment, we did not have computers to take care of our data. So, how did people understand or how did people study ecology in those days? Well, most of it was seeing what is around you and documenting things. So, in the case of Theophrastus, he came up with a collection of 10 books, and in these books he classified plants according to their mode of generation, whether they are coming out of seeds, whether they are coming out of birds, whether they are coming out from some other vegetative parts, and so on. He also classified plants on the basis of their localities, what is found in which areas. He also classified plants on the basis of their sizes, and he also classified plants on the basis of their practical uses such as food, juice, herbs, and so on. So, as we can see here, he is trying to gather information about as many plants as possible, and he is then trying to classify these plants on the basis of their modes of generation, location, size, uses, and so on. So, this is how ecology worked in the very early days. You try to gather information, you try to classify things. Then on the basis of these classifications, he was able to discuss the importance of climate and soil to plants. Now, here again, when we are talking about this example of this plant that is living in this area, we are talking about things like climate, because this area is colder, this area is warmer. So, even today when we are taking these concepts for granted, Theophrastus was the first person to point out these points. Or differences in soil, probably the soil cover in this area is very less. So, this has a say a depth of soil which is say around 5 centimeters. In this area you have a depth of soil which is say around 1 meter. Now, if you have a soil that is 1 meter deep, so it can support a number of different plants, but a soil that is just 5 centimeters deep, it will probably not serve the needs of a number of plants. So, because you have a very high density of plants that are found here, so your particular species is getting out competed, whereas in this area, because other plants are not able to survive, so this plant is able to survive because there is hardly any competition in this area. Or things like the amount of nutrients that are there in the soil. If you have a region that is on top of a mountain, whenever there is a rain in this area, so the nutrients that are there in the soil, along with the rain, they get washed to the bottom areas. So, typically we see that the soils in the mountains are not very nutrient rich, and these are the factors that are governing the distribution and abundance of different organisms, which is the science of ecology. And in this case, Theophrastus was the first person to discuss these factors, the importance of climate, the importance of soils to different plants. So, his book is known as Enquiry into Plants and Minor Works on Odors and Weather Science. So, this is the first person who we are talking about. But then in the case of Theophrastus, it was difficult to note all these different plants, it was difficult to classify these plants, because say even in the case of India, if I am talking in English, I will say that this tree is a mango tree, but if I am talking in Hindi, I will refer to it as aam ka ped. Now, if you have different names for any particular species, it becomes difficult to communicate with other people. So, this was a problem that remained for a very long period of time. So, for instance, in the case of Theophrastus, in his book, if he wrote the name of some particular plant and he was a Greek scholar, and if this text was taken to some other area, say it was taken to Egypt, and probably people in Egypt would be using some very different terms. So, if you have different names for the same species in different areas, you are not able to collate the information, you are not able to collate the information or the findings that are being taken up by different scholars. So, this problem was sorted out by the next fellow, who is Carolus Linnaeus. Now, from say around 300 BC, we are jumping to the 18th century. So, that does not mean that we did not have any ecologists in this period, but it is simply that because of want of time, our list cannot be a very all encompassing list, and so we are just picking on different people who in our opinion are played a very major role in the science of ecology. Now, Carolus Linnaeus or Carl von Linné, he was a Swedish botanist, physician and zoologist. Now, here again you can see that there is one person who is a botanist, he is a zoologist, and he is also a doctor, because he is prescribing medicines, he is a physician. Because in those early days, all these sciences had not matured enough in a way that we are seeing them now. So, now even in the case of if there is a person who is studying botany, a person who is a botanist, he has got so many things to study, because there is so vast amount of information that probably the people are able to devote very less amount of time to other fields. But in these early days, we had people who had a grip on a number of subjects, and so in most cases we refer to them as naturalists. So, a naturalist is a person who is studying nature, a person who is knowing about nature, and a person who is observing nature. Now, that nature can be in the form of plants, it can be in the form of animals, it can be in the form of rocks or soil or anything. So, in these early people you will see that they had a command over a number of topics, and they played a very important role in the development of a number of different fields of science. Now, he lived from 23 May 1707 to 10th of January 1778, and he is called the father of modern taxonomy. Now, taxonomy is a process, or it is a science in which you name different taxa. So, if you are seeing a plant, if there is this mango tree somewhere, what is the name that you give to this mango tree, and what is the family to which this mango tree belongs. So, essentially in the case of our biological world, we say that we have different kinds of taxa. We start with kingdom. So, for instance, a mango tree belongs to the plant kingdom. It is a plant, it is not an animal. So, we have this hierarchy: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus and species. Now, in the case of mango, he said that mango will be written as Mangifera indica, where Mangifera is the genus, indica is the species, and it belongs to a family that is known as the Anacardiaceae family. Now, what he is doing here is that he is using these Latin words for different things. So, in place of calling it a mango, because different languages that are in use today, they can change with time. So, for instance, in the case of Hindi, it could have changed from amr to am, and probably in some other places in India, people would, in place of calling it am, they would call it ama. So, in different dialects, in different languages, the names change, and more so if you are using a language that is currently in existence. So, he made use of all these Latin terminologies, and he developed this science of taxonomy, which is a science of naming different species and different taxa. And he is also called the father of systematics, because after naming all these different species, you were able to classify different species. So, naming of different species, naming of different taxa, and classifying of all these taxa is the contribution of Carolus Linnaeus. Now, in the case of classification, this also has a number of other consequences, because once you have classified a particular species, and if you find some other organism or some other species that is having very close connection, it looks similar, probably it has similar attributes, then probably you will put them together in the same genus. Similarly, the organisms that are close together in the same genus, they will be put in the same family. Now, for instance, if we have an example, in the case of a dog, we call it a Canis familiaris. So, it belongs to the Canis genus and the species is familiaris. In the case of a wolf, you call it a Canis lupus. Now, both of these belong to the same genera, which is Canis. Now, in this case, it also tells you that those organisms that are placed together, they probably evolved from a same common ancestor, because of which they are having very common properties. Now, if we look at systematics, we can discern a number of ideas about evolution, and similarly evolution has been able to refine systematics and taxonomy over the ages. So, this is the contribution of Carolus Linnaeus. Once you were able to name each and every species and each and every taxon, once you were able to classify things together, then you could observe patterns amongst different organisms, amongst different taxa. Next, we will have a look at Thomas Robert Malthus, and we will devote one complete lecture to what he said. So, he was an English cleric and a scholar who lived from 13th February 1766 to 23rd of December 1834, and in 1798 he wrote a book, an essay on the principle of population, and this person, by writing this book, has influenced a number of studies in population ecology. Now, to put his ideas simply, he said that if you consider any population, so it grows via geometric progression. So, basically from 2 individuals, you let us say you become 4 individuals, from 4 to you become 8, 8 to 16, 16 to 32. So, essentially you are doubling at every point of time. So, let us say that if you have a population that was say 1000, so from 1000 it becomes 2000, from 2000 it becomes 4000, then it becomes 8000, then it becomes 16,000, and so on. Now, that is about the population, and in this case we are talking about the population of human beings. But then if you look at the resources in terms of say agriculture, so probably when you had 1000 1000 population, you probably had 1000 bushels of wheat that were being grown. Now, agriculture grows via arithmetic progression. In which case, in the time it became from 1000 people to 2000 people, it grew from 1000 to 2000 bushels of wheat. Now, when this population was able to grow from 2000 to 4000, this was a geometric progression. Now, in the case of a geometric progression, you have this situation that a n plus 1 is given by a n multiplied by a factor of r. So, which means that you can get to the next term of the geometric progression by taking the previous term and multiplying it with a common factor. In this case, we are taking r is equal to 2. So, from 1000 into 2 is 2000, into 2 is 4000, into 2 is 8000, and so on. In the case of an arithmetic progression, you say that a n plus 1 is equal to a n plus a common difference, which is d. So, you add something that is common. So, in 1000, if you add 1000, you get 2000, but then this d remains constant. So, then to your 2000, you add 1000, you get 3000, then you get 4000, then you get 5000, and then so on. Now, it is very easy to observe here that in a very short period of time, the population would have grown to such a large extent that the agriculture will not be able to compensate for that amount of growth. So, essentially your population will grow much faster than agriculture will grow. So, you will have a dearth of resources, and once you have a dearth of resources, there will be intense amount of competition, and probably some individuals in the population will have to die. So, he talked about preventive measures, and he also talked about positive measures through which you can keep your population in check. Now, these were the very early ideas that influenced a lot of thinking of population ecology. So, he was also a person who played a very important role in a subdiscipline of ecology, which is population ecology. Now, the next person we will consider is Alexander von Humboldt. He was a Prussian fellow. Now, Prussian is a person who belongs to the erstwhile empire of Prussia, which is now Germany. So, he was essentially a German person. So, this guy was a polymath, he was a geographer, he was a naturalist, he was an explorer. Again, we are seeing that he had a command over a number of languages and a number of fields. And he lived from 14th of September 1769 to 6th of May 1859, and he performed quantitative work on botanical geography, and he is considered the father of biogeography. Now, this guy was an explorer. So, he took a contract from the Spanish Empire, and then he went to South America. In South America, he went to Peru, he went to Venezuela, he went to Cuba, and a number of other places. And when he went to all these areas, he kept a lookout for what different organisms are found in what different areas. So, in this case, you see that there are certain organisms that are found in the lower slopes of a mountain. So, there are certain organisms that are found here, certain others that are found here, certain others that are found here, and so on. Or probably in the South American continent, you had certain organisms that were, say, found in this area, there were certain other organisms that were found in this other area. So, essentially he studied the distribution of different organisms, and he looked at it in a quantitative manner. So, he put everything down to numbers, and he is considered the father of this field of biogeography. Next, we will have a look at Alfred Russel Valles. Now, he was a British naturalist, an explorer, a geographer, an anthropologist and a biologist who lived from 1823 to 1913, and his contributions were that he independently conceived the theory of evolution through natural selection and also worked on biogeography. So, Valles' line separates animals of Asian origin from animals of Australasian origin. His main contribution was about the theory of evolution. Now, we generally attribute the theory of evolution also to another fellow, which is Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was an English naturalist, geologist and biologist. He lived from 1809 to 1882. He is famous for the theory of evolution and the theory of natural selection. So, essentially this was a contribution of both of these fellows, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. Now, what do you mean by evolution? Evolution refers to changes that happen with time in different species. They may lead to differences that prop up in a species, and they may also lead to the formation of a new species. So, you can understand evolution very easily if you look at the sub steps of evolution. So, if you consider any population, so let us consider the population of human beings. So, in the population of human beings, you will have different individuals who have different characteristics. So, there will be somebody who is tall, there will be somebody who is short, there is somebody who is dark, somebody who is fair, there will be somebody with a black hair, somebody with a brown hair, somebody with black colored eyes, somebody with a blue colored eyes. So, you see n number of variations, and these variations are not only in the external traits, but these variations are also found in a number of internal traits such as metabolic processes. There are some people who can drink milk very easily, there are some other people who have a lactose intolerance. So, we have variations in a number of these different traits, and similar to human beings, we have variations in all different species. So, if you take any species and if you consider the individuals of that species, every individual will have some differences from the other individuals. Maybe less so in the case of homozygotic twins, but more so in the case of people who are distant relatives or maybe not related to each other. Now, if you have these variations, now what can be these variations? Let us say in the case of mosquitoes. So, you spray your insecticides on a population of mosquitoes, there will be some mosquitoes that will die off preferentially because they are completely not able to tolerate the insecticide. But then there will be some individuals that will be able to tolerate the insecticide and they live. Or there will be some mosquitoes that fly very fast, or there will be some mosquitoes that are slow in flying. Now, those mosquitoes that are flying very fast are probably using immense amount of energy, and those mosquitoes that are slow are probably using less amount of energy, but then you will find variations everywhere. So, the first tenet in evolution is variation. So, every species has individuals, and every individual is different from every other individual. So, there are some variations that are there in different populations. But then the second tenet is about overpopulation. Now, in this case what we are saying is that every species, the organisms of every species have this innate ability to produce n number of offsprings, maybe much greater than what the nature can sustain. So, for instance, if you look at a single female mosquito, it may lay as many as 500 to 1000 eggs. So, from two mosquitoes that are there in the parental generation, so you have a male mosquito and a female mosquito, and then you have 1000 individuals in the next population, in the next generation. So, from 2 to 1000 you have a 500 times excess. Now, if this thing continues for a while, in the next generation you again have a 500 times excess and you have 500,000 individuals, and then in the next generation you again multiply it by 500 and you have 250 million individuals. Now, what is happening in this case is that if you have 2 individuals and suppose nature can support for say 100 individuals, or say let us say that nature can support for 1000 individuals, but then you can see that in just first generation, second generation and third generation you have exceeded the capacity of nature by a very huge amount. So, every species has got this trait that it can overpopulate. Even in the case of human beings, people can produce as many as say 6 or 10 offsprings. So, in just one generation you can increase your population by as much as 5-fold, 6-fold, 7-fold, and then in a few generations you will have so many human beings that you do not have ample resources for them. So, which brings us to the third point, which is your struggle for existence. Now, in the case of these mosquitoes, you have these 250 million mosquitoes and the nature can provide for say 1000 mosquitoes. So, what will happen? At every stage there will be some number of individuals that will die off, because those individuals that are better able to get food, that are better able to find a mate, that are better able to say fend off from the predators, they will survive, and the others, they will either die of starvation, or maybe they will not find a mate, so they are not able to pass on their traits to the next generation, or maybe they are killed off by the predators and so on. So, there is a constant struggle for existence if you see the nature, and because of this struggle for existence, the fourth step is that of the survival of the fittest. Or the process of natural selection. So, just because there is a huge struggle for existence, you have less amount of resources, more number of individuals, so there will be some individuals that will be lost. And when you have these processes that are going on for a very long period of time, then you will have certain traits that will preferentially start showing up in this particular population, and probably this would even lead to something that we call as speciation, in which the population becomes so different from the previous generations that it now becomes a new species in itself. So, that is the contribution of Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Valles. So, once you have this idea, so in the case of Carolus Linnaeus, he talked about different individuals, different organisms. He was able to classify these organisms, but then Charles Darwin and Valles were able to show how these new organisms get formed, how these different classes, how these different genera they get formed. So, this was a very big contribution because it was able to collate all the information that had been given out by the previous generations. Next, we will have a look at Herbert Spencer. He was an English philosopher, biologist, anthropologist and a sociologist who lived from 1820 to 1903, and he actually gave this term survival of the fittest. So, he also worked on the ideas of evolution. Next, we will have a look at Ernst Haeckel. Now, Ernst Haeckel was a German biologist, naturalist, philosopher, physician, professor, marine biologist and artist who lived from 1834 to 1919. He made detailed multicolor illustrations of animals and sea creatures. So, here we can see that our quest with naming different things, classifying different things has continued even till the 20th century, because Ernst Haeckel was also involved in making a collection of what different organisms are, how do they look, and so on. And he also coined the term ecology. So, ecology in this case, eco is home, logos is study. So, it is the study of the home, and in the case of Ernst Haeckel, he actually called it as oikology. So, this was the person who played an important role not only in making all these different illustrations, which then also guided the succeeding generations, but he also coined the term ecology. Next, we look at Vladimir Vernadsky. Now, Vladimir was a Russian scholar. He belonged to Ukraine, and he was a mineralologist and a geochemist. Now, here we can see that this is a fellow who is not very much related to biology, but then because of his command over minerals and over geochemistry, he was able to give vital inputs to the science of ecology. He lived from 1863 to 1945, and in 1926 he wrote the book The Biosphere. Now, biosphere refers to that portion of the earth that is able to support life. So, on the earth we talk about lithosphere. So, lithosphere is the rocky portion. We talk about atmosphere, which is the air that is surrounding us. We talk about the hydrosphere, which is all the water bodies that we have together. And there is life on land, there is life in the air, there is life in the water bodies. So, a combination of all of these that is supporting life is called the biosphere. Now, Vladimir also played an important role in being one of the first scientists to recognize that oxygen, nitrogen and carbon dioxide in the earth's atmosphere result from biological processes, and he also gave rise to the biogeochemical cycles. Now, what do we mean by biogeochemical cycles? If you consider any organism, if you consider yourself, so you are taking in a number of nutrients. So, you are taking carbohydrates, proteins, fats, different mineral salts and so on. Now, how are you getting all of these? You are getting it from your food. Whether you are a vegetarian or a non-vegetarian, we are consumers. We are not able to produce our own food. We are not able to perform photosynthesis. So, we get it from something else. Now, that something else can be a plant if you are a vegetarian, or that can be an animal if you are a non-vegetarian. Now, where does that animal get its food from? Ultimately, it will get its food from a plant source. So, plants are ultimately supporting the whole of the biosphere. Now, if you consider any plant, so the plant, while it is growing, it requires water. So, it draws up water from the soil through its roots. It requires air, especially it requires carbon dioxide, which it takes from the air. It requires energy from the sunlight, and it also requires a number of minerals that it gets from the soil when they are dissolved in water. So, through the process of transpiration, this water is taken up from the soil and then it is released into the atmosphere. With the water, it takes up the mineral salts, it takes carbon dioxide from the air, it takes energy from the sunlight, and then it produces the food. Now, this food is in the form of carbohydrates, proteins or fats, which are then stored in its body, and then from this plant, when a herbivore eats it, so it gets into the animal kingdom, then from one animal it moves to another animal, and then so on till it reaches the top predator or the apex predator. Now, when a plant dies, when an animal dies, or any of these animals die, or when they are giving out some waste products, say the animal is giving out feces or the plant is shedding its leaves. So, all of these will be then acted upon by the decomposers. So, the minerals that were taken up by the plant, so let us consider any one mineral, let us say the plant took up iron. Now, this iron, when the animal ate this plant, the animal got the iron. From this animal it moved to another animal and so on, and when the plant died or the animal died or with their waste products, the decomposers got this iron, and then they were able to break down these organic molecules, so that the iron got released into the environment and it was again able to reach the mineral pool that is there in the soil. So, in this way we can see that there is a continuous cycle that is going on from the minerals that are there in the soil, they are taken up through all of the biosphere and then they are released back into the soil. Now, similarly, if we look at another element such as carbon. Now, carbon is a component of carbohydrates, it is there in proteins, it is there in fats, so it is there in most of the organic molecules that we have. Now, where do the plants get carbon from? They take it from the air in the form of carbon dioxide, then they make food from there. When the animals eat it, the animals are getting the carbon. From one animal it is moving to another animal, which are again getting carbon. All of these organisms are releasing carbon dioxide through the process of respiration. So, if there is any animal, it is respiring, it is releasing up carbon dioxide, and when these organisms die or when they shed their parts or when they release feces, all of these come to the decomposers. So, these decomposers are also getting carbon, and then these decomposers break down this carbon into carbon dioxide and release it into the atmosphere. So, here we are seeing another cycle which is moving from the atmosphere through the plants, through animals, and then back into the atmosphere. So, these processes are known as biogeochemical cycles, because they are involving biological beings, the living beings in the form of plants and animals. They are also involving the earth, so which is why you have the geo component, and these are chemical cycles because you are seeing a movement of chemicals through all of these. So, Vladimir Vernadsky was the first person who was able to recognize that oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, everything in the earth, all these chemicals that are there in the earth, they are resulting from biological processes and they are a part of biogeochemical cycles, which was a big contribution. Next, we have a look at Arthur Tonsley. Arthur Tonsley was an English botanist. He lived from 1871 to 1955, and he introduced the concept of ecosystem into biology. So, till this point of time, we were only talking about different species. So, we were talking about, say, a plant species or an animal species, or we were talking about these groups of organisms. Now, ecosystem is a combination of different communities together with the abiotic components that are there in the surroundings. So, essentially, if we talk about, say, a lake, so in this lake you have different organisms. You may be having some fishes that are there in this water, you may be having some plants that are growing in the water, you may be having some planktons or some algae that are growing in this water, maybe some other animals that live in this water, say a frog, and you also have a number of abiotic components. What are those abiotic components? Consider the air. If you do not have air, then oxygen will not get dissolved into the water, carbon dioxide will not be released, and ultimately all these life forms will die off. So, you require air for the survival of all of these. You require water for the survival of all of these organisms. You require the soil that is there in the bottom. So, all the biotic components together with the abiotic components, they form the ecosystem. And once you study the ecosystems, you get very different properties from what you can get from a study of only the biotic components. Now, Tonsley is very important because he introduced this concept of ecosystem into biology. So, the biologists do not have to study just the living forms, but they also have to study the non-living portions, the abiotic components. And he also played a big role in consolidation of the science of ecology by founding the British Ecological Society. So, that was one of the very first societies that were formed for the promotion of ecology. Next, we will have a look at Charles Sutherland Hilton. He was an English zoologist and animal ecologist. He lived from 1900 to 1991. He was a pioneer of modern population and community ecology, and a pioneer of the study of invasive organisms, and he is also known as the father of animal ecology. Now, what do you mean by a father of population ecology? Now, when we say population ecology, a population is a group of animals that belong to the same species that are living together in one area. So, let us say consider all the monkeys that are living in a forest. So, they are forming a population. Now, what are the interactions between the members of a population? How does the population size grow or reduce? Do these members cooperate with each other or do they fight with each other? So, is there competition or is there cooperation? When do we have a competition? When do we have a cooperation? All these things are studied in population ecology. When we talk about community ecology, a community is a group of different populations. So, when we are talking about a population, so a population has only one species. A community has several species. So, when we are talking about community ecology, we ask the question, how do these different populations or the members of different populations which belong to different species, how do they interact with each other? So, for instance, we might ask the question, what are the relationships of predation in this area? So, in this forest there are monkeys and probably there are some mosquitoes. What is the relationship between the monkeys and the mosquitoes? Or probably you can ask the question, what is the relationship between a monkey and a plant? There is a mango tree that is growing in the forest. Is the monkey helping the mango tree or is it destroying the mango tree? Because we may say on the first glance that the monkey is eating up the mangoes and so the monkey is harming the plant. But on the other hand, we will find that by this process of eating of the mango fruits, the monkey is also transporting the seeds of the mango tree to other areas. So, it is playing a big role for the mango tree. If it were not for the monkeys, all these mango fruits would just drop down below the tree, and once you have a situation where you have a tree and all the fruits are coming down here only. So, in this case the seedlings that come out, the seedlings that germinate, they will not have access to enough resources because this plant is taking up all of the sunlight. So, probably all this area is dark, it does not have sufficient light for these seedlings to grow, or probably because this tree has a very large network of roots. So, these seedlings will not be able to compete for water or for minerals. So, because you have monkeys in this system, so they are taking this fruit and they are throwing it somewhere else. So, probably you have a fruit that is thrown here. So, from this seed you will get a mango plant that is coming up in this region. So, a monkey is playing a very big role for the mango tree, and such kinds of interactions are studied in the field of community ecology. And Hilton happened to be one of the very first people who studied these topics, the differences between population ecology and community ecology. He was also one of the pioneers of the study of invasive organisms. Now, what is an invasive organism? An invasive organism is an organism which, if it enters into a system, is able to outcompete everything else or a number of other native species. Consider lantana. So, lantana is a shrub like species that is it is a woody species that is found, and it is not native to India, it comes from Africa, but then it is now invading into all of our forests. So, what it does is that it has a number of flowers, it produces a very large amount of fruits, those fruits are sweet, it produces very small sized seeds and those seeds are very hardy. So, those seeds are able to tolerate a very wide range of conditions. So, you will have birds that feed on these fruits, they have these seeds, they gulp it down into their intestines, into their stomachs and intestines, and after these seeds have come out, they will after these seeds have been eaten, they will come out along with the bird droppings. So, if you have a forest and you have say a patch of lantana here, you have n number of fruits and seeds, you will have a bird that will transport these seeds, and because these seeds are very hardy, they will then start growing up in a number of other areas. So, you will start having these small lantana patches everywhere, and lantana is so good at getting nutrients from the environment that it is able to outcompete most of the native species. So, you will have a forest that after a while will be full of lantana. Now, such species are known as invasive species, and Hilton was one of the first people who studied these invasive organisms. So, he is the pioneer of the study of invasive organisms. Next, we will look at George Evelyn Hutchinson. He was a British ecologist who lived from 1903 to 1991, and he gave the theory of interspecific competition and also wrote a treatise on limnology. Now, limnology is the study of lakes. Now, in the case of a lake ecosystem, what is happening is what you will be studying in the case of limnology. He is called the father of modern ecology, and he wrote a lot on interspecific competition. Now, interspecific competition is when an organism of one species is competing against an organism of another species. So, for instance, in a forest you have cheetals, which are deer species, you have sambars, and cheetals are also feeding on grasses, and say sambars are also feeding on grasses, and they also browse a bit. Now, if you have different species that are feeding on the same resources, so there would be some sort of competition. It is possible that you will have some sort of competition. Now, there are mechanisms through which organisms tend to come out of this problem of competition. So, they will go for specific resources. So, for instance, sambar will prefer to live in areas that are more hilly, and cheetal will prefer to live in those areas that are more grasslands. But then what are the relationships between these organisms that are using the same resources? Or for instance, there is also a classic case in which you have these two organisms. So, let us say you have this cheetal and you have the sambar, and you also have a tiger in this system. Now, if a cheetal is able to increase its population, so in that case the tiger will be getting more food because a tiger feeds on the cheetal. So, the tiger population will increase. Now, if the tiger population increases, a tiger also feeds on a sambar. So, if just your cheetal population is increasing and the sambar population is not increasing, then because of the impact of the tiger, you will have a decrease in the sambar population, because more number of tigers will be feeding on more number of sambars. So, there are also a number of interactions in which organisms are not interacting directly, but at the same time they are competing with others, they are giving a negative influence on other organisms. Now, all such things come under the domain of interspecific competition, and George Evelyn Hutchinson was one of the first people to study these. Next, we will have a look at Lotka. So, Lotka and Volterra, they were two people. Alfred James Lotka was a US mathematician, physical chemist and statistician. So, you can see that he was quite away from biology, he was more inclined towards mathematics and the physical sciences, and he is known for Lotka Volterra equations of predator-prey relationship, together with Vito Volterra, who was an Italian mathematician and physicist who lived from 1860 to 1940, and both of these people, Lotka and Volterra, are known for the Lotka Volterra equations of predator-prey relationship. Now, what is this relationship? So, let us suppose we are considering a system where you have a predator and a prey. Let us say we are only considering two species, one is a cheetal and the second one is a tiger. Now, if this cheetal population, if it increases, so let us say we have an increase in the cheetal population, that would result in an increase in the tiger population, because now the tiger has more amount of food, and so it does not have to wander off to larger areas, it does not have to defend a larger territory, so it can reproduce much more easily. But then if you have an increase in the tiger population, that would in effect start predating on the cheetahs. So, you started with an increased cheetah population, but then an increase in the tiger population will result in a decrease in the cheetah population. Now, if your cheetah population decreases, so in that case you will have less amount of food that is available for the tigers. Now, if you have less amount of food that is available for the tigers, then in effect the tiger population will decrease, because they are having less amount of food. Now, if the tiger population decreases, so the cheetahs now have less amount of predatory pressure. So, in that case the cheetah population will increase further. So, this is a sort of cyclical relationships that we observe in nature, that if you have two species that have these relationships of predator and prey dynamics, so the increase in the predator population will depend on its own population, plus it will depend on the population of the prey, and similarly the population of the prey will the increase or decrease in the population of the prey will not only depend on its own population, but it will also depend on the population of the predator. Now, these dynamics and these equations are known as Lotka Volterra equations for predator prey relationship. So, now we are moving towards the field of mathematical ecology. Lastly, we will have a look at Eugene P. Odom. He was an American biologist who lived from 1913 to 2002, and he is known for the book Fundamentals of Ecology that was published in 1953. And he was one of the stalwarts of the field of ecology, because he was able to collate all these different information from different fields, and he was able to bring it out in the form of a book which gives us an access to all of this different information. So, the book Fundamentals of Ecology is one of the very first textbooks that was published in the field of ecology, and this also cemented the role of ecology as a science in itself. Plus, he also did a lot of research in different ecological phenomena. So, we can see that ecology is a very old science. Even people who lived in the pre-Christian era were also looking at distributions, abundances of different organisms, and using the resources that they had at their disposal. They did not have computers, they did not have access to all these different theories, but then because of their inquisitiveness, they started this field of understanding the abundance and distribution of different organisms, and with time we have delved more deeper and deeper into this subject. We have started looking at how members of one population interact with members of the same population, how do members of one species interact with other species. We have moved into mathematical ecology. We have tried to describe different relationships in forms of equations and so on. So, we can see that the science of ecology has its own long history, and now it has come up in the form of a separate field in itself. So, that is all we had to discuss today. Thank you for your attention. Jai Hind.